Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whenever it is for you. For me, it is just past midnight on Thursday, February the 6th, 2025, day 1078 of Vladimir Putin's war of aggression against the people of Ukraine. That makes this the news for Wednesday, February 5th, 2025. I'm Peter Alexievich, and this is the Live at 5, coming to you live from a beautiful uptown Kyiv, this major European capital currently under siege. And I see the peeps are coming in. Hey, Max. Hey, Lars. Hey, Pug and Mahone. Hey, Bobby. Hey, Dot. Oh, hey, I got to get that. Hey, Bernard. Hey, Paul Smith. Leo Ring. Richard Prexis. How's everybody doing? How is everybody doing? Now, you guys know when you join the Patreon at, the mother level or higher, you get a live sponsorship. And so tonight it's going to be Arn and Ben Lindbeck. Arn and Ben are the sponsors of tonight's live. So if you see those guys around, tell them I said thank you, because I could not do this without the Patreon guys. The Patreon guys make it possible for me to stay here in Ukraine and continue to do this. Hey, super user, how you doing? Hey, Bakhmut, how's everybody doing tonight? The topic is always Ukraine. It's Ukraine, Ukraine, Ukraine all the time. Now, normally, so there's a couple things. First of all, tomorrow night is going to be a kind of a different Live at 5, right? Tomorrow night there will be a very specific topic. Instead of the general news of the day, tomorrow is a special live that is focused on drawing the parallels between the fall of the Soviet Union and the current economic and geopolitical situation in Russia, which would lead me to the conclusion that we will see the dissolution of the Russian Federation as we know it today because of this war. I do not believe the Russian Federation will survive. And I think if we look at the historical parallels with the fall of the Soviet Union, I think we could get some insight into that. Right, what we should be looking for to happen as we watch this tragic nightmare of this war play out. So let's get started. So usually we do the news and then we do Q&A. And I'm thinking of maybe doing each news item and then asking if people have questions about it and moving on that way. Because I notice a lot of questions scroll through the comments, and I don't know that people are getting their questions answered. So we might do something like that. We might break it up tonight. I might try breaking it up tonight into topics, stories, Q&A. I don't know. Let's see how it goes. So, for example, I might start like this, right? Last night, we saw the Russians send 104 drones, attack drones at the territory of Ukraine. Ukraine took out 99 of them. That's a 95% interception rate. There was damage in a couple of provinces across Ukraine, but no word of any casualties last night, unlike the terrible missile strike on Izium yesterday. Now, according to the Atesh group, right, the Atesh group is that partisan group that works behind the lines. These guys, I stand in awe of these guys. Every single day they go out and risk their lives to challenge the Russian occupation in the occupied territories. And today, what we saw was they got information somehow, informants inside the Russian army communicated to is what the Atesh group is claiming, communicated to the Atesh group the location of some boats. Now, what kind of boats are we talking about? You guys know the Russians have accumulated about 300 of those small river boats, right? Like pontoon boats, rubber boats, that kind of thing, with an outboard motor for crossing the Dnipro. And in a warehouse in Holoprastan, right across from Kherson City, the Atesh group learned that they were storing boats there. There were at least 10 of these boats in this warehouse, plus a bunch of Russians. The Atesh group communicated the coordinates of the warehouse to the Ukrainian armed forces. They called in what we think was probably a HIMARS strike, though it's not clear. It might have just been an artillery strike. The warehouse was destroyed, a lot of Russians were unalived, and the boats were also destroyed. And so the Atesh group is active behind enemy lines every day, taking out resources like those boats. The Russians have tried now twice to use those boats to cross the Dnipro. In each case, there were no survivors. I find myself saying those words a lot more these days, right? I mean, the Russians keep making these big assaults, like we saw today around Pokrovsk. Now, the situation in Pokrovsk is a difficult one. There's no doubt. The Russians have been grinding toward Pokrovsk for months and months and months, and they can't take it on head on. So they are trying to get around it. They're trying to surround it. The problem is it has not been a Russian winter. It has been very, very mild. Today was above freezing all day. The same is true out on the front line. And so what's happening is the ground is muddy and mucky. You can't run armored vehicles or heavy vehicles through that muck and mud. If you're going to make a large mechanized frontal assault, you got to have a road. You got to have a road. And so to the northeast of Pokrovsk, trying again to circle that city, the Russians launched a large-scale mechanized attack. Now, I'll tell you, I'm waiting for some kind of an official source for the numbers, because the numbers that are going around Telegram cannot be true. They're huge. They're talking about over 100 tanks. They're talking about 1,300 personnel. They're talking about 1,000 armored personnel carriers. It doesn't seem possible that it could be that large of a mechanized assault. We haven't seen a mechanized assault of that scale in a long ass time. However, the Russians did just repair the railroad terminal that's right there. They would have had the ability to bring in a lot of armor, a lot of heavy armor that we haven't recently seen on the battlefield. So it's possible that the numbers are right. What we do know is that the video footage overlooking the battle space is like a scene from an apocalyptic Mad Max movie. It's one burning vehicle after another. It is apocalyptic. It's apocalyptic in scope and scale. And apparently the reason that this is why the Ukrainians, a country with a fifth of the population of Russia, a country that had every disadvantage relative to the aggressor state in terms of men, in terms of resources, in terms of stockpiles. This is why Ukraine is in the fight still the way that it is. because the Ukrainians are fighting a 21st century war, while the Russians are fighting like a mid 20th century war at best. And we see that distinction writ large in the failure of this mechanized attack. It's a mechanized attack. You're supposed to go out on the battlefield and meet other tanks, right? Using drones. Because they were using tanks and because the weather is against them, they had to use the two roads to the northeast of Pokrovsk. There's just two roads there that heavy armor could run on. Well, that means that the Ukrainians knew exactly where they were and where they were coming from. And Magyar's birds took them out before they could even reach the contact line. The 15-kilometer run from the train station to the front line is just a path of death. And the Ukrainians rained that death down on them. Literally, none of the 1,300 soldiers using those post-World War II tanks, Brodog, got to the front line to engage the enemy. They were all taken out by drones before they got there. It's the 21st century versus the 20th century. And without massive, overwhelming numbers, the 21st century is kicking the 20th century's ass. All right, so at this point, let's stop for a minute and let's ask the question, does anybody have any questions on this Pokrovsk attack, overnight drone attack, the Atesh thing? Haha, Bip. Thanks, pal. I mean, Bip is not wrong. I lost a number of Patreon supporters this month, or last month. It was not a good month. And I could use some help. There's no two ways about it. So, yeah, if you can join the Patreon, please do. Or if you can sponsor live, the PayPal is in the description. Anyway, okay, so what else is going on? The Ukrainians are not sitting on their laurels. They hit last night, and it is still burning, to the best of my knowledge, the Al-Bashneft oil depot in Krasnodar Krai. It's on fire. Russia is on fire. Hey, Bence. According to Russian officials, they say that only one tank was struck, and it contained only a residual amount of oil products. Yeehaw. Thanks, Mike Berry. Let me tell you something. If that fire is caused by a residual amount of oil products, you don't know what a residual amount is, because the flames are 200 feet in the air, right? Like 70 meters. It might just be one tank looking at the video, but it's on fire, baby. It's on fire. We are seeing something. So across Russia, sign-up bonuses have surged in recent months, right? As recruitment has slowed. It's estimated that last spring, the Russians were recruiting 250 men a day in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Today, they are recruiting less than 50 men a day in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Recruitment bonuses have surged too in those cities. As of November, a record 2.5 million rubles, or $25,000 US dollars. But that record-breaking number has now been eclipsed by the Samara Oblast, which is paying 4 million rubles to conscripts that sign up to go immediately to the front. They are told, for 4 million rubles, you are going immediately to the front, with no training, just being handed a gun to participate in meat assaults. It's my understanding that they are telling them they will pay them less and they will get training and go to rear positions, but they will not get the 4 million rubles. For 4 million, you go right to the front. They are playing on the desperation of a debtor nation in a time of extreme inflation to basically sell their lives to the government for $40,000. And it is working. According to independent Russian media outlet Verstka, the record bonus drew Russians from all over the country. The dormitories in Samara are full. The conscripts are all being sent to storm units. According to Verstka, 3.6 million is coming out of the regional budget, while another 400,000 from the Russian MOD. So it's a joint effort of the Russian MOD and the Samara regional office. Now, we're getting word that lots of federal districts like Samara are not meeting their conscription quotas. That today, Russia's losing nearly, in the last 2 months, Russia has lost nearly 100,000 men in 2 months, but they're recruiting less than 30,000 men a month. The size of the army is being depleted. Not only that, it is being stretched thinner as that front in Kursk keeps expanding, and even as the front around Pokrovsk keeps expanding. The more the Russians push with fewer men, the thinner the line becomes. According to analysts at the ISW, even if the Russians were to make a major breakthrough, they don't have the men to push through the breach. They wouldn't be able to exploit that breakthrough. So it is just, for the Russians, it is grinding attritional warfare on the ground. For the Ukrainians, it is the race to embrace the technology that will prevent a grinding attritional war on the Ukrainian side. Let the Russians fight that way. Yesterday's missile attack on Izium left 5 dead, including an 18-year-old girl and a pregnant woman and her fetus. That's the final death toll from yesterday's attack that also destroyed the city council chambers. Now, Zelensky's Piers Morgan interview, I had a chance to give that a listen. And Zelensky said a lot of things. He said that he is ready for talks, and he indicated that those talks should be 4-way talks. Now, that is not what Trump and Putin want. Trump and Putin want to act like Yalta 2.0. They want to be the superpowers dividing up the earth and not having to listen to anybody else. That's what all this talk about Canada and Greenland and Mexico and Panama is. Imperialistic nonsense from the United States. Anyway, Ukraine is having none of it, having said very clearly that talks without Ukraine are dangerous. And I couldn't agree more. We cannot shove a peace solution that's architected by the genocidal lunatic in the Kremlin on the Ukrainian people. Can't do it. Can't be done. First of all, I don't think they'll accept such a thing. With or without us, they will fight. The EU wants a seat at the table, and I think Zelensky wants them there. So the 4-party talks are likely to be Ukraine, Russia, EU, and US. Now, for his part, Zelensky didn't pull any punches when he was talking about Putin. He said very clearly, quote, "I will not be kind to him. I consider him an enemy. I think he considers me an enemy too, and boy, does he." We will talk about that in 1 second. Regarding territory, giving up territory, Zelensky said something that's not untrue. He said something that's not untrue, though we don't like to hear it. He said, regrettably, the support that is provided by our partners is insufficient to push Putin out of our territories. Quote, end quote. And he's not wrong. He's not wrong. He also said that if sacrificing, or he didn't say sacrificing, he said if for the purpose of peace and to stop the violence, we need to cede some territory temporarily as part of a ceasefire, that would be something we would consider, right? That would be something we would consider. Regarding security guarantees, he said, quote, a roadmap for Ukraine to join NATO remains Kyiv's favored way to end the fighting and get security guarantees. So right off the bat, look, we know the Russians will never accept an agreement where Ukraine goes into NATO. So right off the bat, you've got a stumbling block there. But Putin isn't stopping there. He's going out of his way to create other blocks to peace talks and negotiations. Specifically, he is pushing this narrative that because the Ukrainian constitution says you can't have elections when martial law is declared, it's a constitutional issue for the Ukrainians. He's saying that Zelensky hasn't been elected, he's therefore illegitimate. Now, the idea that a man who runs a country for 25 years, detaining, disappearing, and dispatching every one of his political rivals so that there are no free and fair elections, that he would hide behind the veneer of legitimacy and sling mud at Zelensky for this is bullshit of the first order. It's typical Russian bullshit. And we heard it again from Kremlin mouthpiece Dmitry Peskov today when he told the lie again. Of course, Russia is happy to have negotiations if only there were legitimate person to negotiate with. Bip, you said it best, right? I think you said Zelensky is Putin's kryptonite or something like that, right? He is the bane of Putin. And yes, Putin hates him and will not deal with him. One of the stated goals of the special military operation was the removal of the Zelensky government. So they're pushing that narrative hard, right? He's been saying to his people that he will not talk to Zelensky. Well, now that we're down to it, he either has to sit across the table from him and look the fool, or he has to push him out. And my great fear is that the U.S. might listen to this bullshit. So Kyiv Kyiv has slammed the talk of elections as unrealistic. To quote Dmytro Litvin, the president's communication advisor, Moscow keeps increasing missile and ammunition production, finding new ways to bypass sanctions and make money from its oil. And it's clear that all these weapons are not being built to respect their democratic neighbors. I think that that's beautifully put. Now, Keith Kellogg, the U.S. point man on Ukraine negotiations, said most democratic nations have elections in time of war. I think it is important to do so. Now, I want to point out that this is not true. It's true for the United States because of our mass and the two oceans. We can have elections when we're at war. But it is not true in most other places, any place else. Like, look at Ukraine. And immediately, the naive attitude of Keith Kellogg toward holding elections should become clear to everybody. In Ukraine, it's a constitutional issue We've mentioned that already. But then additionally, how do you ensure that the millions of Ukrainians who are out of the country get represented in this election? What do you do about the occupied territories? Putin is not going to let those people vote in a Ukrainian election because they're now Russia, according to him, right? Cheryl, it's very difficult to say whether or not Zelensky would win re-election. If somebody like Zelensky ran against him, maybe not. Maybe not. However, that kind of distraction, or even the idea of having to mount a campaign when 20% of your territory is occupied, the people in that territory have no voice, and you need to drum up support to get out to the ballot box. And then how do you secure those elections? How do you know that the day of the election, when everybody is queuing up to vote, Russia's not going to send passels and passels of drones? You're creating targets, civilian targets that can be exploited. Not only that, you're opening up Ukraine to Russia for it to play its favorite game, election interference, driving a wedge deep between the Ukrainian people with hateful slogans about the other side. That is the last thing that Ukraine needs right now, and the worst thing that could happen to it. Right? Does that make sense? Okay. So this question of elections, I'm very concerned about it. Because if the U.S. forces elections as part of the process, which I don't think they can do, because there's going to be this issue of who gets to vote in the occupied territories. Russia ain't going along with that. So Russia's creating these demands that it knows can't be satisfied, pushing for its maximalist goals and screaming like a child if it doesn't get them. If it doesn't get what it wants, I have 6,000 nuclear missiles. I will fry you all. Wah, wah, wah. That's what it's like. Keith Kellogg, for his part, despite his naivete, is planning on February 14th to deliver a Valentine's Day card to Putin, I think, is who it's going to be for, because the peace plan will be unveiled on Valentine's Day, February 14th. Now, I mentioned yesterday that the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency was in Ukraine. He was denied entry, and his crew was denied their rotation into the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant by the Russians. Now, the presence of IAEA inspectors at Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant ensure the safety and security of everybody around that plant and the plant itself. To deny access to the inspectors is not only a violation of international agreement, but it is an extraordinarily dangerous thing to do. So that standoff is going on. As far as I know, the IAEA team is not leaving until they are permitted access. Now, we saw the Astrakhan gas facility, which feeds gas into the Baltic pipeline system too. So that goes all the way up to Ust-Luga, which is a major export hub for Russian oil and gas. That facility is now shut down following the attacks by Ukraine last week. That's a good hit. It's out of service. David Lammy, the British the British Defense Minister, is in Ukraine. He unveiled a $70 million, about 50 million pound humanitarian aid package for Ukraine. I wonder how much of that is to fill the gaps in the humanitarian aid that has stopped flowing from the United States. It's very disconcerting to me that we have just fucked our allies. We said we would be there for them, and then we've just cut it off. I'm sorry. Is he Foreign Secretary, Jeff? I'm so sorry. My deep apologies to the British people, or to the people of the United Kingdom and Mr. Lammy. He also ponied up about $5 million, £3 million for the UN Food Initiative with Syria to get Ukrainian grain to Syria. Zelensky made a comment that Ukraine was promised $177 billion and they've only gotten $76 billion. And I have to say, so the question has become in the press, where's the missing 100 billion? There is no missing 100 billion, guys. And it was disingenuous of him to say that, really, because he knows very well that the whole 183 billion is not going to him. It's not all coming to Ukraine. Not a lie. Let's call it a political exaggeration bip, right? It was disingenuous because, look, that figure includes tens of billions of dollars to replace weapons in Ukraine, in the U.S. that we've sent to Ukraine, right? So we sent Ukraine 100,000, 155 millimeter shells. Well, we need to buy another 100,000 and put them in stock and replenish our stocks. So there's tens of billions right there. Then there's all the money that we sent to partner countries to support Ukraine, like with the training of F-16 pilots out of the country, for example. So it was not entirely genuine a point. I want to highlight that. He does have a point, though. There is about an $11 billion difference between what he says he got and what the Office of Budgetary Accounting says we sent. Now, that should be of concern to everybody, right? The only thing is, when you drill down into it, it becomes pretty clear where that money went. It went to partners, it went to associated efforts, or it was humanitarian aid in its nature, not military, etc. You can see all of this in great detail, and I think I'm going to do a video on it next week and go through all the numbers. But we still live in a democracy, thank God, by the grace of God. And so we have transparency in our budgetary accounting. There is a government website for the United States government called the Ukraine Oversight website. And all the budgets are there, every dime that we've spent here. Anybody who says, we don't know where the money's going over there. Yeah, we fucking do. Right, take 5 minutes, do a Google search, and you will see all of the governmental accounting for that money. That is not to say that the money in support hasn't been drip, drip, drip just in time. It is. It is. It has been. It's a problem. Okay. Lastly, let me remind everybody that tomorrow night will not be your average live. It'll be kind of a deep dive discussion looking at the parallels between the fall of the Soviet Union and the economic and geopolitical situation then, and then the economic and geopolitical situation for Russia today. What are the parallels? What does it look like? And what should we be looking for based on the historical experience of 1989 today? Okay. So, guys, again, I want to thank Ben Lindback. I want to thank Arn and Mrs. Toad. Is Mrs. Toad in tonight? Thank those guys for their generous support through the Patreon. and note them as sponsors of tonight's live. I also want to thank any of the mods that are here. I want to thank Nightshade, who has the Peter's Peeps group on the Book of Faces, and I want to thank Lars, who has the Discord server. All right, questions, comments, points of observation. It is the year of the snake, Nicola, and the year of the snake has not been good to Russia, boy. Not in the last 120 years. Well, I guess that's an exaggeration, 119. Oh, no, this year it's 120. It's 2025 now. So, yeah, the last 120 years have not been... The year of the snake has been bad for Russia. So what else is going on, guys? Oli Minator, did you get here late? Because I did about, I don't know, like a third of this live tonight was about what was said on that interview with Zelensky. I would encourage you to check the recording of this live. Yeah, dude, we talked about it at great length. We talked about Zelensky's responses to negotiations, security guarantees, territorial concessions, the Russian objections to NATO and election fraud, etc. We talked about it at some great length. And I think you're right. I think people should watch it, right? What country are you in? Because you said it was on YouTube where you are, right? YouTube does vary from country to country. So, and if you don't want to say what country you're in, that's fine. But I'm pretty sure you said it was on YouTube. You saw it on YouTube, right? There's no way Belarus is getting involved, right? Remember, Pugga Mahone, Russia kept Belarus weak so that it could absorb it. The Belarusians only have 60,000 troops, and really only about 40,000 of them are really soldiers. The rest are more like police. And they are under-equipped and under-trained. Do I think Russia is weaker today than in 1989? Hell yeah, bro. Way weaker. Way weaker. They've gone through all those Russian stockpiles. All those Russian stockpiles. You know, the Russians were making a bunch of money from oil in the 80s, too. It's not like the economy has changed very much. It's been an extraction or war economy pretty much most of its existence, which is what has allowed the aristocracy, the Politburo, and the oligarchs to thrive by seizing control of those national assets and turning them to profitable use only for themselves, for that 0.00005% of the population. They just opened the donkey stockpile. That's a crime and a sin, isn't it? Better than camels, I guess. BIP overall numbers for tanks, armored vehicles, jets, and Russian troops dead. On the subject of troops, the Western intelligence agencies tell us it's probably around 220 to 250,000. In terms of tanks, they just hit 10,000 tanks. They had about 12,000 going into this war, and they just hit 10,000 lost. Like crazy, man. Artillery pieces, I want to say it's 22,000, but somebody would have to fact check me on that. Helicopters, if I'm not mistaken, the helicopter number is at 332, which is one away in less than 3 years of all the helicopters lost in Afghanistan in 9 years. Right? There were, if I'm not mistaken, it was 333 helicopters lost in Afghanistan and 332 so far in Ukraine. Planes, a bunches. These statistics are commonly provided by the Ukrainian armed forces. You know who publishes them all the time is Nightshade. Nightshade has the list up on the Peter's Peeps group. If you remember that, check there. Well, Norman, you're not wrong. Russia is just a gas station. Take away the gas, what do you have? Well, you got to remember it's just a gas station with nukes. You still have 6,000 nuclear warheads pointed at the United States and our European allies. Total cost so far is estimated to be about $200 billion in terms of daily operating costs, but that does not include the cost of all the lost equipment, lost lives, and lost productivity. That it doesn't include any of that. I did, Dark Irish. I did. Yeah, Nightshade posts those numbers daily on TikTok. Check them out. Do they have hot dogs? I don't know the answer to that. How many more Russians do you think they are willing to lose? All of them. Well, so Anthony Tommy Tom says, the Russian nukes don't work, Peter. He's full of shit. And when it comes to as I understand it, and I've listened to a lot of people talk about this, but the consensus seems to be among the experts that when it comes to the tactical nuclear arsenal, Anthony, you're right. None of them work. The problem is there's still 1,700 deployed strategic nuclear weapons. It is likely that they work. It's likely that, which, by the way, is a violation of the New START Treaty from 2010. We're only supposed to have 1,550 nukes deployed at any one time. So of the 1,700 or so that Russia has deployed, likely all of them work. Even if only 10% of them work, that's 170 nukes. You can do a lot of fucking damage with 170 nukes. So we can't ignore the possibility. I don't believe it will happen. I don't think Putin is suicidal. So I don't think we'll see a nuclear exchange in this conflict. But one cannot rule it out, and one must take it seriously. I think that that's fair to say. Am I genuinely worried about global future? Fuck yeah, I am. We're seeing this incredible rise in the far right in fascist ideology, and we're now seeing the United States government subverted by it. So yeah, I'm very worried. You're at Great Wolf Lodge, man? What is that, like Tannersville, right? Or just up the road from the Tannersville exit. Dude, my son used to love going to that place. Oh my God, magic wands, treasure boxes, the wave pool. It's the best. Keep rowing, Bobby. Just keep rowing. Oh yeah, I do worry about that water a little bit. It is kind of filthy, man. Make sure you give her a bath when you go back up to the room. Right, Aiden? You're not wrong, Michael. You are not wrong one bit. Guys, I'm still getting better from this COVID. It's awful. There's a great wolf in Scottsdale. I don't remember a great wolf in Scottsdale. I don't know. Did I ever tell you, Michael? I worked out of Scottsdale for 6 years. I worked out of an office in Scottsdale there. That was quite a job. I lived in Pennsylvania. My boss was in Scottsdale. His boss was in Newfoundland, Canada. And his boss was in Dublin, Ireland. Ohio. It's only there maybe 5 years. Okay, I haven't been in Scottsdale. I drove through Scottsdale about 4 years ago. That was the last time. No, I never mentioned. No, I spent a lot of time there, yeah. We had to go to the office about 6 times a year for a week at a time for different things. Oh, sure, I know where you are. I know where that is. What else is going on, kids? It's just about 8 to the top of the hour. Hey, Truthful. We're just wrapping things up. I'm thinking of saying goodnight. When I look at this war, increasingly it becomes clear to me that the reason the Ukrainians have been able to stay in the fight is because they are fighting with a 21st century mentality, while the Russians are fighting with, at best, a 19th century mentality. George, I can't comment on that because I don't know what was said. I've heard some stuff. I haven't looked at it at all. And really, this channel is focused on Ukraine. Unless it intersects Ukraine, it's not really my ballywick. Thank you, Hardly. I sure appreciate it. That's what they said, Bobby, back in 1776. That's all our old buddy Ben. Thanks, Heidi. Stalin tactics. Yeah, Jeff. Slava Ukraini. Heroin Slava Blue. Thanks, Eli. Again, thanks very much to the sponsors of tonight's live, Arn and Ben. Thanks again for your thoughtful support, Mrs. Toad. And to everybody else out there, aside from the Patreon supporters, I don't have any live sponsors the rest of this month. If anybody wants to sponsor the live, the PayPal is in the description. And if you can join the Patreon and kick me $5 a month, that would be deeply meaningful to me right now. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Chef Deb. Thanks, Jeff Roberts. Thanks, Lars, Bobby, and Cargo, and everybody else. Make it a great day.